We now bring you highlights of Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's speech on political pay delivered in Parliament on Tuesday. Mr. Lee was speaking in support of recommendations set out by an independent committee to review ministerial salaries. He starts by speaking on the challenges of building a good government.
Mr. Speaker, sir, we've discussed the issue of ministerial salaries many times over the years in this House, and it's always a very difficult and very emotional issue, for completely understandable reasons. First, because you're talking about pay, which is always sensitive. Second, you're talking about significant amounts of money, especially as would appear to the ordinary man in the street, millions of dollars. And thirdly, because you're talking about what elected ministers are earning. And it's vital for us to get a pay system which works for us. Because this is not just about how much money ministers will get, but it's about Singapore's future. It's about ensuring that Singapore always has a good government, leaders who care for our people and our country, who have strong abilities to carry out the responsibilities of ministers, and to have more than that, the character to handle pressure and the mettle to provide steady leadership in a crisis. For both those coming in from the private sector and the civil servants and SAF, these were very tough decisions. For the private sector, you are coming in from a career where you are known, where you are doing well, where you have your network, you are on the up, and if you stay on, you know what you're going to do. It's not just the earning power, it's also the excitement, the challenge, the success, the thrill of being at the top of your career and your profession. You'll come in, you may succeed, you may fail. And you cannot go back to the private sector and rejoin your profession. 5 years later or 10 years later, you're not as young. 5 more years of bright young people have come along, filled up the places, taken your clients or patients, and you go back out, you are in a different path. So it's an irrevocable change of course. And of course, there are family and privacy considerations as well, especially if your family is still young. How will they be affected? Will I have time for them? Can they cope? Will their financial prospects be affected if I come in? Because I have to calculate the implications. Similarly, for those from the public sector, in a way, it's easier because policy-wise, they have been working on policies. Contact-wise, they probably have more contact with the ministers, so they know what the ministers are doing and the ministers know what they are doing. But for them also, it's a one-way ticket because you have to resign from the public service. You go out, it's diving into the ocean. The Chinese say 下海, meaning the private sector, but here you are diving into the ocean, into politics. And likewise, no assurance of success, because writing policy papers for a minister is quite different from standing up in Parliament and expounding and defending and persuading and carrying a policy which you have had to take the lead to set and to work out. So it is not a simple matter to come in. From the point of view of their own calculation, from the point of view of the responsibility which they are taking on, is not a simple matter either. Because you're going to be, as a Minister of State or Minister, responsible for the futures, the lives, the security, the prosperity, the education of several million Singaporeans. And if you're not up to it, several million people are going to suffer the consequences. Quite apart from any mortification or embarrassment which you may feel, but the responsibility which you are taking onto you to do this on behalf of Singaporeans. If you don't pause and take a deep breath and think it over for several days, you are not fit for this job. So when people say, come in, I have the passion, I will proceed. If only life was so simple and passion was sufficient for everything. You need the passion, but you also need to be circumspect, to think, and consider carefully, am I up to it? Can I really make that contribution? Therefore, you're not talking about huge numbers of people. You're talking about a few dozen possibilities in Singapore. Finally, when it boiled it down, in each election, we've never brought in more than 6 or 7. I have never discussed salaries with the potential candidates who are coming in, either from the private sector or from the public sector. Because if money had been their principal consideration, we wouldn't even have fielded them as MPs, much less appointed them as ministers. But I asked them to join politics because they had the right values, because they were capable, and I believe that they could make meaningful contributions. And they agreed to come in because they wanted to serve, and after searching their souls and consulting their families, they felt, yes, I think I can make a contribution. I don't believe that salaries was a make or break issue for any of them who have come in. But I have no doubt that proper salaries have made it easier for me to build the team which I have today and to provide the best service which we can to Singaporeans to govern the country.
Coming up in part 2 of the Prime Minister's speech, Mr. Lee explains why pay is critical to assembling the best team to serve Singapore. You're watching highlights of Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's speech in Parliament on political pay. In part 2, he touches on the importance of proper salaries and why Singapore does not follow how other countries pay their ministers.
Because pay goes to one of the core requirements for Singapore, to assemble the best team to serve Singapore. And if you have the wrong system of pay, you will have the wrong team. And as PM, this is my constant worry. I'm less concerned about the impact of the salary revisions on my present team of ministers. They've come in, they've committed themselves, they are in for the cause. This pay cut is not going to affect their dedication to serve. But my bigger concern is for the long term, for future cabinets and potential office holders. People who have not yet come in, people who must make that decision and that commitment. Can a future PM continue to get the best and most committed people to serve as his ministers? In fact, can we get the best possible future PM for Singapore? How can our pay system support this important goal? And if we have a pay system which supports this, how can we get Singaporeans to accept that? The ethos of service is critical if you are coming into politics. Ideally, we should take public service as being inherently different from the private sector. Public service has its own reward, and we just set salaries sufficient to support ministers at a reasonable standard of living, independent of what the private sector earns. And there's no shortage of talent. Bigger monetary sacrifice will not deter more public-spirited Singaporeans from serving. In fact, some people have argued that a bigger sacrifice will encourage more public-spirited people to come forward. I respect this view, but even though in our hearts we would wish and hope that it were true, in reality, we know it's not so simple. Our own experience and the experience in other political systems provides a reality check. Yes, there will be always some able Singaporeans who are willing to serve regardless of the terms. And we treasure people like that. And when we feel them, when we find them, if they're suitable, we feel them because they are very special. But will there be enough of them to produce a whole team of ministers, a whole cabinet, equal to the task and with the standards which we have come to expect? And can we afford to risk the future of the country on the assumption that there's no trouble, we'll find them, salaries do not matter? From my experience working the system, I know it is not so easy. We're talking about a small group to start off with, And every additional hurdle you put, every additional burden you put on the step forward to come in, you make it more difficult and you narrow your choice. And foreign leaders, in fact, often privately admit to us that they wish they could have followed us, but unfortunately their politics does not allow them to follow us in the way we deal with the public sector and with ministers' pay. And foreign visitors tell us the same, how impressed they are with our ministers, how impressed they are with our system. I have had many foreign visitors who tell me, your ministers are different, and I've worked with ministers in many countries, and I've not met a team like your team. Another visitor told me, after the elections, says, don't change your system. You look at this other big Asian country, and he named it. He says, the ministers have paid nothing, but every single one of them is worth at least $200 million. They know it because they see it working here. Therefore, they invest. Therefore, they have faith in us. Therefore, Singaporeans benefit from this reputation and this confidence which the world has in Singapore. So, Singapore is different from them. I don't need to go into details, but I just skim through quickly. You look at the US, president is paid less than me. Yes. And the last time I had the revision, the newspapers reported a certain anonymous high-level resident of the White House saying that he wished he were paid the same. But the high-level residents in the White House travel in Air Force One, live in the White House, vacation at Camp David. And after they retire, they earn many times their salaries. All they have to do is to turn up for an appearance, make a few remarks, $100,000 a time. And in 3 years, George Bush has earned $15 million since retiring. Bill Clinton, who retired a decade ago, has earned $75 million. Britain has the same challenges. Low official salaries topped up by generous benefits. Just now, Mr. Faisal Manap says, well, because they live in London, that's why they are given these benefits. That's the explanation. The reality is they are given these benefits because they could not be given the pay. And so it was presented as benefits, and the understanding was these are claims you can make, and so long as you submit some piece of paper, well, we will pay the claims. Because this is just a way to work the system so that you can be paid what you really truly need to be paid. And the MPs took this literally. They submitted claims for maintaining their swans in their pond, for cleaning up the moat of their castle. Somebody submitted a claim because he was watching some exciting movie in his home. And when all this came out, there was a humongous scandal, and they had to chop all that down, and now they have a very serious problem because now they cannot pay MPs via this route. Neither can they raise the MP's allowance because MP standing has sunk rock bottom in people's esteem. So, other countries are different. We have deliberately not followed that model. I think we should not follow that model. Good government is going to remain critical to Singapore in future. I do not see it likely that we are going to find it easier to get good ministers in future. I think the contrary is the case. First of all, Singapore politics is becoming more complex, more uncertain. It's not a sure ride, it's not a career move. You can lose, and even if you win, the job of politics, persuading people, arguing with people, dealing with the brickbats, is a lot more complicated than before. On the other side, there are many more exciting career opportunities available for able and ambitious young Singaporeans here and abroad. And it's tremendously exciting. Round worldwide opportunities is exciting not because of the pay. It's exciting because these are young people who think that they're going to change the world. And when we say come back, change Singapore, that's as important and as challenging. They'll say, well, I'll think about it. So in that situation, I think it's going to take a lot of persuading to get young people to give up these opportunities and enter politics, whatever ministers are going to get paid.
Coming up in the final part of the Prime Minister's speech, how he assesses ministers and measures their KPIs. We now bring you the final part of Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong's speech on political pay, where he talks about accountability and how he assesses his ministers.
One important argument which people have raised is accountability. Since ministers are paid well, so they have to be held accountable to perform. I would say, yes, ministers have to be held accountable. But I would say ministers have to be held accountable whatever they are paid. Whether you are paid $1, whether you are paid $1 million, whether you are paid $10 million. You are the minister, you are serving the people. You have to perform to the best of your ability. And as Prime Minister, my responsibility is to ensure that individually, each minister performs up to expectation. And collectively, the Cabinet delivers the best government for Singapore. So my duty is to set objectives for ministers, assess them, hold them to account. And to do this carefully and comprehensively. To take into account not just what the minister does in his main portfolio, but also his broader contributions to our overall team and to Singapore. And it's not always possible to reduce this to a simplistic formula or to a finite set of KPIs, which you can just measure the numbers and then calculate the bonus. Because ministers have responsibilities in many dimensions, often intangible ones. For example, building the SAF and home team is the work of more than a generation. So is keeping Singapore safe from terrorism. When a new minister comes in and takes over and the performance is good, it may be his good work, it may be his predecessor's good work. Same with national development. Building public housing, yes, everybody knows how to count how many HDB flats are completed last year. But also planning the city, conceiving a new Marina Bay, creating green corridors and spaces all over Singapore. You put that into a KPI, so many kilometers, so many new Marina Bays, so many new IRs. Cannot be done. So it's not possible to have a preset formula to determine the performance bonus. The national bonus, yes, and that's about half of it. That's about the same size as the performance bonus. That you can measure: GDP, median income, 20th percentile income, unemployment. These Department of Statistics can churn out the numbers. But the minister's responsibility, his core responsibility as well as his broader responsibility and contributions, that cannot be reduced to a formula. Finally, it's a judgment I have to make after consulting my senior colleagues and decide who has made the greater contribution, who has been the more effective minister. And I've circulated a table showing you what the minister's grades are currently. 2 DPMs, 1 minister on MR3, 1 minister on MR4. Then I've also given the grades for the ministers of state and the parliamentary secretaries. Sorry? 1 on MR3, 10 on MR4. I didn't intend to shrink my cabinet. So presently, nearly all the ministers are on MR4 because the cabinet is still new, is really in transition, still settling in. But I expect in the steady state to promote more ministers to the higher grades and to build a strong team which will comprise 3 tiers of ministers across the different grades in cabinet. The newer ministers who are being developed for heavier responsibilities in future. The more experienced ministers overseeing major ministries or areas of work. And then the senior ministers, I don't mean senior ministers as a title, but ministers who are more senior, who help me coordinate more than one ministry and oversee whole of government issues. So Singaporeans have to evaluate ministers fairly, and they have to take into account both the contributions and the shortcomings. If a minister is negligent or dishonest, then of course he has to be sacked. I have not had to do that. But if a minister doesn't perform well despite all his best efforts, then I may move him to a less demanding portfolio where he is able to perform, or if necessary, I may have to phase him out discreetly. It's not always visible, but it is necessary to do, and it is necessary to understand why not everything can be done in the full glare of the spotlights. Apart from mistakes from time to time, not every person who comes into government will succeed as a minister. It's a difficult job. You never know until you are in it whether it will work or it will not work. And sometimes you have to give it a try. I can make two types of mistakes. I can put in somebody and it didn't work, or I may decide I don't want to try somebody and he could have been a good minister. So I think that I have to accept that when people come in to be ministers, sometimes it doesn't work out, in which case I need a graceful way to disengage and part amicably. Exits are delicate matters, and they have to be handled with dignity and decorum. And ministers, too, are deserving of dignity and decorum. And you cannot turn this into a public spectacle and have it deter more good people from entering politics. I don't expect this speech to be the last word on ministerial salaries. But it is my responsibility as PM to tackle this very difficult issue. To find and prepare the best possible team of ministers for Singapore and the best next team to take Singapore forward. So I hope Singaporeans will understand this bigger picture, will know that getting in the right leaders who are passionate, committed, and have the right values is key to their future. And to do that, you must have the pay system right. It's very hard for a new PM to do this. So Mr. Lee Kuan Yew tried his best to clear the decks before Mr. Goh took over. I think Mr. Goh did all he could to put it on as sound a position as possible before he handed over to me. And I have to do my part to try and make it work in a different environment for a new phase, but looking forward beyond me into the next generation. So I'm taking this on my shoulders, and I ask for your support to make the right decision for Singapore. And then we will have always capable, public-spirited men and women in government to serve our people and to secure our future for many years to come. Thank you very much.